Today we'll be discussing characters and the process called characterization. I am sure you guys know what a character is at this point, but you might not know all the ways that an author uses this process called characterization to make their characters seem like believable people. So today's EQ is, how do authors reveal what the characters in a story are like? So let's start by having an official definition for character. A character is any individual in a story. It can be a human, it could be an animal, it can be some weird mishmash of those, but it's just any made-up individual in a story. And the example that we'll use for right now is Harry Potter, and another one that is relevant to us is Vashti from the Dot. So one thing to keep in mind about characters is that they're the ones responsible for making the plot events of a story happen. Without characters, nothing's going to happen. They can initiate an event or make an event start. They can react to events just like you would react to something going on in your world. And interactions between characters can move the plot of the story forward. We're going to go ahead and look at different kinds of characters that you might encounter in a story. The main character of the story is the character that the story is mostly focused on. A protagonist, and you guys heard me use this word the other day when we were talking about Hatchet. The protagonist is the character in the story who's working to solve the conflict of the story. They're working to resolve whatever the problem is. Okay, so something that's important to know is that most of the time, the main character and the protagonist are going to be the same character, but I want you guys to be aware that there are some exceptions. For example, there is one very famous novel that you guys will probably end up reading at some point in your academic career called To Kill a Mockingbird. In that story, To Kill a Mockingbird, it's argued that the main character is a little girl named Scout. The story focuses on her adventures during the summer. However, it is also argued that it's not actually Scout who's the protagonist of the story, but her father, Atticus Finch. One of the main problems in the story is that a black man has been charged unfairly with a crime, and Scout's father, Atticus Finch, is a lawyer who is trying to help this man. So because Atticus Finch is the one who is actively working to solve the problem, he's the protagonist. Whereas Scout, we're seeing everything through her eyes, and we're seeing a lot of the adventures and stuff unfold around her. She's the main focus of the story, and she's the main character. So it's not always the same character, but most of the time it is. And in all of the stories you guys have probably read up to this point, the main character and protagonist have probably been the same character. So Harry Potter, totally a protagonist in his story. Mario in any of the Mario games, Sonic, etc., etc. 11 in Stranger Things, right? There's all kinds of people working to solve the conflicts of their stories. The other type of character we're going to talk about today is called the antagonist. You guys might see this "an" part right here. That's a sign of the word showing that it's going against something else. So an antagonist is actually a character that goes against the protagonist of the story. Most of the time, the protagonist is the good guy, and the antagonist is the bad guy. So if I'm looking at my protagonist examples from above, Voldemort is Harry Potter's antagonist, Bowser is Mario's antagonist, Dr. Robotnik is Sonic's antagonist. Okay, so good authors usually don't tell us exactly what it is they want us to know about their characters. Sometimes we might get a description of what they look like, but usually We have to go on the information that the authors show us about their characters. And they show us through this process called characterization. So, characterization is a nice long word that means the way that an author develops a character through their story. When we're talking about development, we just mean how the author shows us what the character is like as a person. And we're going to go more in depth in just a minute, but basically when we're looking at characterization, we want to look at the things that a character says, thinks, and or does. So because authors aren't going to just give us a list of all of the little details about their character, we have to use inferences to understand the things that the author wants us to know about their character. So remember, when we make an inference, we're using what we see in the text and we're combining that with how we understand how the world works. So we're going to walk through an example of analyzing the characterization of somebody using Vashti from the dot. And I'm going to give you a strategy to help you be good at doing this kind of analysis. So we're going to use a strategy called STEAL to help us analyze Vashti. STEAL is an acronym like ideas that helps us remember all of the steps we need to take when we're doing a character analysis. The S in STEAL stands for speech. What does the character say? How do they say it? We use this a lot in our day-to-day life when we're interacting with other people. We can gauge what a person is like based on how they talk to us and what kind of things they say to us. We can do the same thing for characters. Let's go ahead and look at an example from the dot. The quote that I'm taking from the text could technically count as either speech or thought because Vashti is saying this to herself. She says, "If I can make little dots, I can make big dots too." So the author hasn't told me anything directly about Vashti here, but I can make a good inference about what he wants me to understand about Vashti. So I'm going to go ahead and make my inference now. So based on that quote and my own life experience, here's the inference that I was able to come up with. Vashti is ready to try new things. I know for myself, when I am starting something new and I am just starting to figure it out, I realize more of the things I can do while I'm working on the things I already know how to do. And usually I want to try those new things, and I'm ready at that point to try those new things. So my life experience is helping me infer from that quote that Vashti is ready to try new things too. The T in STEAL stands for thoughts. What does the character think? We can learn a lot about who the character is as a person when we get those glimpses into their thoughts. So this is another quote from the story that could count either as speech or thought because Vashti's talking to herself. She says, "Well, maybe I can't draw, but I can sign my name." The inference that I can make off of that quote is that Vashti is aware of what she's currently able to do, but she doesn't realize that she can do even more than that. She's still stuck in a fixed mindset at this point. The E in STEAL stands for effect on others. Good characters have an effect on the characters around them, just like real people have an effect on the people around them. So how do other characters treat them, and how do other characters react to that character that you're analyzing? So the quote I found in the dot that shows Vashti having an effect on another person is this one. "You're a really great artist. I wish I could draw." That's the little boy at Vashti's art show. She's got all of these dots up and he's looking at them and he is super impressed. I'm going to go ahead and make an inference based on this quote now. Based on that quote from that little boy, it's pretty obvious that Vashti is now an inspiration to other people. That little boy saw everything that she did, and now he wants to go out and do that too. She has inspired him to go do more than what he thought maybe he could do before. The A in Steele stands for actions. What do they as a character do in the story? Do their actions match up with what they say and think? I chose this quote to demonstrate one of Vashti's actions in this story. It says, Vashti kept experimenting. This is coming from when she's trying all the different kinds of dots and colors and sizes, painting dots without actually painting dots, etc. So based on how much experimenting she's doing and how carried away with everything she's getting in the story, it's pretty easy to see that Vashti doesn't hate art class anymore. She doesn't hate art. She is super excited about it now. She has learned to love art. And finally, the L in Steele stands for looks. So, what does the character look like? So when we're looking at the character's looks, sometimes there's an extra message there behind what their looks represent. So if somebody has a bunch of scarring or a broken nose, we might be able to infer that they've had a hard life, or maybe that they're a criminal of some sort based on the other information that we have. But just like in the real world, we can't always assume too much based on looks. So in the case of the dot here, we see exactly what Vashti looks like, and I'm gonna say I really can't infer too much about her as a character based on her looks, other than she's a little girl in school, right? So sometimes the looks can be super helpful to give us extra information. So for example, maybe we're talking about what the clothes are that the character's wearing. Like if you watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, if you saw somebody in a Fire Nation suit, you'd probably make some kind of inference about whether or not they're a good person or if they're a bad person, etc. But we need kind of that extra information and that context to make a good inference. What you should do right now is you should go back through your notes and add questions and study terms in your questions column. So for example, I see I've got the word character over here. I should move it over here to my questions column, so I remember that that's something that I need to study because that's an important term. I would do the same thing for main character and protagonist and antagonist, especially those words that you're less familiar with. So transfer that vocabulary over and then develop some kind of questions you think that I might ask on a quiz. So maybe I would ask you who the protagonist of a story is. So for example, who is the protagonist of Hatchet? I would want questions that show some kind of application of your thinking, okay? And then after you've created your study column, you need to add your summary to synthesize your learning at the end of your notes. Your summary is where you're attempting to answer the essential question. So the essential question from these notes was, how do authors reveal what the characters in a story are like? You're going to summarize the notes that I gave you to help you answer that essential question. All right, guys, I hope you have a good day.